Okay, imagine this. Using sensitive data without actually exposing it, think mission impossible. But for your customer information, financial records, healthcare data, all that sensitive stuff, it's called data masking. And today, we're going deep.
What I find really interesting about data masking is it's not about just, locking data away. It's more about
Mm.
finding that balance where you can still use the data for all the important things like testing, analytics, training AI models, all the things everyone's talking about these days.
Right. And with all the hype around AI and ML these days, plus those data regulations, GDPR, CCPA, all those, it feels like this is way more relevant now than ever before. So we're diving into a report today. It's called Privacy Management Spark Matrix Data Masking. It came out in August 2024 by QKS Group. And they've done a really awesome analysis of the whole data masking market. Plus, we're going to spotlight one vendor that really stood out in the report, Mage Data.
Yeah, the QKS Group report is a fantastic place to start. Gives us that solid overview of how data masking is changing, what makes the top solutions stand out.
So, let's get down to basics. What exactly is data masking?
Well, QKS defines it as replacing sensitive data with realistic, but fake data. The goal is protecting privacy without having to sacrifice the usefulness of the data.
So it's like creating a safe version of your data, a sanitized version. So let's say you're training an AI to detect fraud. You need real-world data to make it effective. But you can't just feed it actual credit card numbers, right? That's where data masking comes in.
Precisely. You can replace those sensitive elements with data that looks and acts real, but doesn't expose any personal information. It's a game changer, especially with those evolving regulations you mentioned. Think about GDPR's right to be forgotten. Data masking helps companies comply with requests for data deletion without disrupting their whole system.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's almost like you're creating a parallel universe of data, one that's safe to work with, but still reflects the real world. But wouldn't masking kind of make the data less useful for certain tasks? How do you make sure you're getting that balance right between security and usability?
That's the big challenge. And it's where we're seeing the real innovation happening in data masking. One of the biggest trends right now is using AI and ML to automate and refine the masking process. Imagine a system that scans your entire data landscape, even unstructured data, emails, documents, and flags sensitive information, like a digital detective working 24/7.
Wow, so instead of having to manually tag sensitive fields, you've got an AI doing the work for you. That's a pretty big step forward. It sounds like AI is taking data masking from reactives to proactive.
Absolutely. And this AI-powered detection, it's often paired with what we call real-time masking, meaning data is protected as it's being used, not just when it's stored. Think about how much data flows through different systems in real time. Cloud platforms, applications, everything. Real-time masking is essential to keep up with that.
Okay, so AI is changing things.
Yeah.
What other trends are shaping the future of data masking?
Another big one is dynamic data masking. Instead of applying the same masking rules to everyone, you can tailor them based on who is accessing the data and why. So let's say a customer service rep might only see the last 4 digits of a credit card number, but a developer working on the payment system might see the full mask number.
So it's all about making sure the right people
Yeah.
have the right level of access
Yeah.
without compromising security. It sounds like a much more, I don't know, granular approach.
Yeah.
But doesn't that also add a lot of complexity?
It does, but the payoff is worth it. Dynamic data masking is essential for complying with regulations like GDPR, which mandates different levels of data access based on what the data is being used for, and it aligns with the growing need to share data securely. Across different organizations, imagine a company working with a partner on a project. They can use dynamic masking to share just the data that's needed and keep everything else hidden.
That's a great example. It shows how data masking isn't just about security, it's also about enabling collaboration and innovation.
Exactly. And this focus on, granular control ties into another trend, zero trust masking. It's about applying the principle of least privilege to data access.
Okay, break that down for me. What does least privilege actually mean in practice?
It means no one gets automatic access to sensitive data, not even your own employees. It's about verifying every single request, no matter who's making it, essentially minimizing the damage if a breach happens.
So even if someone gets into your system, they don't have access to everything. That's a pretty big shift. No more assuming everyone inside is automatically trustworthy.
Exactly. And this approach, it's especially important as cloud computing rises. You need those extra layers of protection to make sure data is secure in every environment. But it's not just about, reacting to threats. The QKS Group report also talks about the importance of strengthening cyber hygiene.
Okay, cyber hygiene. Does that mean we're all supposed to be washing our digital hands more often?
Well, good digital hygiene is always important. But in this context, it's more about taking a broader approach to data protection. Data masking isn't a one-time fix. It needs to be part of your entire data lifecycle, from the moment you collect the data to how you store it, process it, even deleting it.
So it's about building data security into how your organization operates, not just using a Band-Aid solution.
Exactly. Data masking becomes a core part of your data governance strategy.
All right, we've covered a lot here. What data masking is, why it's important, and some of the trends shaping its future.
And now that we've got the big picture, let's talk about what makes certain data masking solutions stand out. The QKS Group report really dives into that, highlighting those key features that set the leaders apart. One of the most important features is centralized key management.
Okay, keys. Sounds important. Is this where we get all cloak and dagger?
Not quite. Think of it this way. Centralized key management is liking having a master control panel for your encryption keys. It streamlines how those keys are generated, distributed, and updated, making sure everything stays secure and compliant.
So instead of having keys scattered all over the place, you have one system that makes managing encryption much easier and more secure, too. That seems especially important for companies that are working in multiple environments, like using both cloud platforms and, their own data centers.
Exactly. It ensures you can control data security no matter where that data is. And as more companies use hybrid and multi-cloud environments, this becomes even more critical.
This is all making a lot of sense. But before we move on, I'm curious about another feature mentioned in the report. Bring your own encryption, or BYOE. Is it as simple as it sounds?
It is. It's all about giving companies more control over their security, even when they're using the cloud. So instead of relying on the cloud provider's encryption, you can bring your own keys. It adds a really important layer of security and compliance.
So even though your data's in the cloud, you control who can access and decrypt it.
Yep.
It's especially important for organizations with really strict security and compliance needs, like in finance or healthcare. They need that extra assurance that their data is protected, even when it's not on their own systems.
Okay, so we're starting to see how data masking is changing. To meet the challenges of these really complex data environments, we've only just scratched the surface here.
There's so much more to explore. In the next part, we're going to take a closer look at Mage data. They've really caught our attention. With their innovative approach to data masking, they seem to be ahead of the curve on a lot of these trends we've been talking about.
Sounds like they're doing some really impressive things. I'm ready to dive deeper. Okay, so we've kind of laid the groundwork. We understand what data masking is, why it's important, and some of those big trends that are shaping its future. So now I'm curious, what should companies actually look for when choosing a data masking solution? Well, that's where the QKS Group report gets really interesting. It goes beyond just listing features, and really digs into what makes a solution truly effective. One thing they emphasize is the importance of robust governance, security and compliance capabilities.
Okay, so it's not just about having the technology. It's about using it responsibly and strategically. What does that look like, practically speaking?
It means having a solid framework in place. For managing your data masking policies, you got to make sure your solutions are configured correctly, that they're being used consistently across the organization, and that you can demonstrate compliance with all those regulations out there.
Right. But the regulations are always changing, and data environments are just getting more complex.
Yeah.
How can companies keep up with all of that?
Well, that's where features like detailed audit trails come in.
Yeah.
Leading solutions offer really comprehensive logs. They track who accessed what data, when, and what they did with it. It's like having a security camera. But for your sensitive information...
So if there's ever a question about how data was handled, you've got a clear record that you can refer back to. Huge help for compliance and investigations. But what about the data itself? Does masking change the data in a way that makes it unusable for, certain tasks?
That's a great question. And it brings us to another important factor, data format preservation. Even after it's masked, it needs to retain its original structure and format. This is especially important for organizations that rely on older systems or applications that are really sensitive to data formatting.
So like if you're masking a date field, You need to make sure it still looks like a date to those systems. It can't just become some random string of characters.
Exactly. You're going for that balance between security and usability. And while we're talking about usability, let's not forget about the people actually using these systems. The report also highlights the importance of an intuitive interface. Data masking can get complex, and you don't want to need a PhD in cryptography to use it effectively.
So it's not just about those fancy features. It's also about making them accessible to a wider range of users, people who maybe aren't like super tech savvy.
That's a good point. But before we move on, I'm curious about something you mentioned earlier, data reduction strategies. What are those exactly, and how do they fit into the data masking picture?
Data reduction strategies. It's all about being smart, about what data you actually need to keep around. Sometimes the best way to protect data is to just not have it in the first place. Think about anonymizing or deleting data that's not needed anymore, or redacting sensitive info from datasets before they're used for analysis.
So it's like decluttering your data, right? Getting rid of anything that could be a risk.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very proactive approach.
It is. It sounds like it really complements data masking well.
It does. By reducing your overall data footprint, you're naturally minimizing your risk.
That's a smart strategy. But with so much data moving through companies these days, just identifying and categorizing all that sensitive information must be a huge task. How are companies managing that? Well, that's where AI and ML come back into the picture. We've already talked about their role in real-time masking, but they're also changing the way companies identify and categorize sensitive data. Think about tools that can scan your entire data landscape and automatically flag sensitive information based on predefined rules or patterns.
So instead of relying on manual tagging, which is, prone to errors, you've got AI doing the work.
Precisely. It's like having a digital assistant that never gets tired, constantly learning and refining its ability to spot sensitive information.
But even with the best data masking in place, there's always that risk, right? That someone might figure out a way to re-identify anonymized data.
That's true. But don't worry. Automated tools for assessing re-identification risk are getting better all the time. They can analyze datasets, see if there are any vulnerabilities, and assess how likely it is that masked data could be re-identified.
So it's like a safety check, making sure your data masking efforts are actually working.
Exactly. It's essential for responsible data management, especially with all those data privacy regulations we talked about.
Right, compliance isn't just about checking boxes. It's about protecting people's privacy.
Absolutely.
And building trust.
Exactly.
And speaking of trust, let's go back to AI and ML in data masking for a sec. The QKS Group report actually uses this interesting metric, they call it maturity of AML technologies, to assess how well vendors are integrating AI and ML into their solutions. So it's not just about having AML features, it's about how well they're integrated and how effective they are at improving the overall data masking solution. But with all this talk about AI, it makes me wonder, are we putting too much faith in AI? Could there be any unintended consequences, things we haven't thought of yet?
Yeah, that's a really valid concern. Like any powerful technology, AI and ML need to be used responsibly and ethically. We have to be aware of potential biases in the data that's used to train these systems and make sure they're not being discriminatory or leading to unfair outcomes. And we have to be aware of the potential for misuse, like creating synthetic data that could be used for fraud or spreading misinformation.
Right. Technology is a double-edged sword.
It is.
But it's clear AI and ML are changing data masking.
Definitely.
And one area where we really see this is the rise of cloud-based data masking solutions. We touched on this a little earlier, but I'd love to dive a bit deeper. What are some of the biggest advantages of cloud-based solutions compared to those traditional on-premise systems?
Well, cloud-based data masking offers some really compelling benefits. Scalability is a big one. Cloud solutions can easily adapt as your data grows, so you don't have to worry about buying expensive hardware or managing complex infrastructure.
So you're essentially paying for what you use, and you can adjust as your needs change. Big advantage for companies that are growing quickly.
Definitely. And another key benefit is accessibility. You can access cloud-based solutions from anywhere as long as you've got internet, which makes it easier for teams to collaborate and manage those security policies. This is super important these days with everyone working remotely.
It's like having your data masking toolkit available everywhere you go. But what about security? Isn't it kind of risky to put sensitive data in the cloud?
Well, security is always a top priority. And reputable cloud providers invest a lot in keeping their customers' data safe. They often have more sophisticated security controls and expertise than most companies could achieve on their own.
So in some cases, the cloud might actually be more secure than traditional data centers. That's not what I would have expected.
It is. And then cloud-based data masking solutions. They add another layer of protection by encrypting that sensitive data before it even goes to the cloud. So you've got double protection, both in transit and at rest.
Okay, so we've talked about the benefits of cloud-based data masking, but are there any challenges, things that companies should be aware of?
One potential challenge is vendor lock-in. Once you've committed to a specific cloud provider, it can be hard to switch to a different one. So it's important to think long-term.
Yeah.
And pick a provider that gives you the flexibility and interoperability you need.
Yeah, you don't want to get stuck with something. They can't keep up with your needs. But it sounds like, for companies that are already embracing the cloud, the benefits of cloud-based data masking probably outweigh the risks.
I would agree. The cloud is changing the world of data masking, and solutions like the ones Mage Data is offering are leading the way.
All right, before we move on to our deep dive into Mage data, let's zoom out for a second and remember why we're having this conversation. Data masking can get pretty technical, but we can't forget the human element.
That's a really important point. Data masking isn't just about compliance or avoiding risk. It's about protecting people's privacy, making sure sensitive information stays safe, and building trust. In a world where data is so valuable and vulnerable.
Right. It's about doing the right thing, being responsible with the data we have access to, and creating a more ethical data ecosystem.
Exactly.
That's a powerful thought to keep in mind. As we go into the final part of our deep dive, where we'll explore how Mage Data is actually putting these principles into action.
Definitely. Their approach to data masking goes beyond just the technology. They're really focused on building partnerships and helping their clients create a culture of data security.
All right, let's dive in. All right, we've talked about what data masking is, why it's important. Now let's talk about who's doing it well. Mage Data has come up a few times. I'm really curious what makes them stand out. I mean, there are a lot of companies in this space.
Yeah, the data masking market is getting pretty crowded, but Mage Data has really impressed us with their approach and their focus on customers. One of their biggest strengths is their sensitive data discovery. They're really good at finding and classifying sensitive data, even in really complex environments.
Right, it's like that digital detective we talked about. They can find those hidden pieces of sensitive information that other solutions might miss completely.
Exactly, and that's so important. You can't protect what you can't find, right? Mage Data gives companies that visibility, which is really the foundation of any good data masking strategy. But they do more than just discovery. They've got a whole suite of solutions: static masking, dynamic masking. They really cover a lot of ground.
So they're not just a one-trick pony. They've got all the tools.
Exactly. Tokenization, format-preserving encryption, deterministic masking, non-deterministic masking. They support it all. So companies can pick the right approach for each piece of data and how they're using it.
That flexibility is really important, especially with all these different data environments out there. But what about implementation and support? Data masking can be pretty intimidating, especially for companies that are new to it.
One of the things we really appreciate about Mage Data is their customer focus. They don't just sell you the software and disappear. They offer ongoing support, proactive troubleshooting, and they've got great training programs.
Okay, so they're really invested in their clients' success. Do we have any examples of how they've actually helped companies?
Oh, absolutely. The QKS Group report highlights several case studies. For example, they helped a big financial institution implement data masking across their organization so they could meet regulatory requirements, but also improve security and efficiency.
Wow, that's impressive. But the financial industry is known for its security. Can Mage Data's solutions work in other industries too?
For sure. Their solutions have been used in healthcare, retail, even government. They seem to understand the unique data privacy issues in each industry, and they adapt their solutions accordingly.
That's a good point. Data privacy isn't one size fits all.
Nope.
The approach you'd use for a healthcare company is going to be different from what you'd use for a retailer.
Exactly, and Mage Data gets that.
It sounds like Mage Data is a really strong contender. But to play devil's advocate for a minute, are there any downsides or limitations that companies should be aware of?
That's a good question. Mage Data is great in a lot of ways, but their solutions can be complex to implement, especially if you don't already have a strong security foundation.
So maybe not the best fit for smaller businesses or companies that are just getting started with data masking.
Right. You might need more technical expertise in-house, or be willing to invest in some professional services.
That makes sense. Anything else to consider?
Well, Cost is another factor. Mage data solutions are a bit more expensive
Yep.
than some of the other options out there. You're paying for that quality and comprehensiveness, but it might not be right for every budget.
Right, the classic trade-off between features and price. But it sounds like for companies that need a really strong data masking solution, Mage data might be worth the investment.
I think so. They're definitely one of the leaders in this space. And with their focus on innovation and customer success, they're going to be a major player for years to come.
Right, we've covered a lot in this deep dive into data masking. We talked about trends, what to look for in a solution, and we took a close look at one company that's really making a difference. But before we wrap up, let's bring it back to you, the listener. Why should you care about data masking? What are the key takeaways here?
Data masking isn't just for security experts anymore. It's essential for any company that handles sensitive data, no matter how big or small, or what industry you're in. The risks are real, and data privacy regulations are only getting tougher.
Yeah, it's not just about avoiding fines or bad press. It's about protecting your reputation, maintaining the trust of your customers and partners, and doing the right thing with the data you have.
Absolutely. And as we've seen, solutions like the ones Mage Data is offering are making it easier than ever to implement data masking effectively. But technology is just one part of the puzzle. You also need to create a culture of data security, educate your employees, and have clear policies and procedures.
Right. Data masking isn't a one-time thing. It's an ongoing process.
It is.
It takes attention, vigilance, and a commitment to constantly improving. But it's worth it. By taking data masking seriously, you can protect your organization, build trust, and really unlock the power of data without sacrificing privacy or security.
I couldn't have said it better myself. It's not just about mitigating risk. It's about empowering your organization to innovate, collaborate, and thrive in this data-driven world, while still respecting everyone's privacy.
Those are great words to live by. So to our listeners out there, take this information and do something with it. Explore the resources out there from organizations like the QKS Group. Check out solutions from companies like Mage Data and start thinking about how data masking can work for you.
And remember, this is a field that's constantly changing, so stay curious, stay informed, keep asking questions. The world of data is evolving quickly. It's up to all of us to stay ahead of the curve and make sure we're using data responsibly and ethically.
Couldn't agree more. That's it for our deep dive into data masking. We hope you found it helpful and interesting. Until next time, stay safe, stay secure, and keep learning.